There's absolutely government manipulation at the beginning of all this. When the Federal Reserve was created on Jekyll Island, that was just a bunch of bankers getting together and forming new legislation. There's no doubt about that. And that's how the Federal Reserve really did come about. But they did so because they were looking at the trajectory, the vector of our country, and saying, America has already chosen. And this is the only way that we can go about continuing the economic expansion that we are currently enjoying and that people have set themselves upon.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and this is the Miles Franklin Weekly Special for September 18th through September 25th, 2023, while supplies last. This week we feature two different specials. 10-bar bundles of Nordic Mint 5-ounce bars at $1.99 over spot per ounce, and quarter-ounce gold eagles at $59.99 over melt. First, when you purchase 10 or more 5-ounce Nordic Mint bars, you pay only $1.99 over spot per ounce. 3/9 fine silver, these are priced lower than almost anything else other than 1,000-ounce bars, but with the far better liquidity of the 5-ounce size. The Gold Eagle was first released in 1986 and has been one of the most popular gold bullion coins in the world, providing incredible recognizability and investor trust. The quarter-ounce eagle is additionally sought after for its high degree of flexibility and liquidity. Like the 1-ounce eagle, the quarter eagle is 22-karat gold strengthened with copper. Its 1/4 of a troy ounce of gold comes 40 to a tube, 2,000 to a box, and it's available at just $59.99 over melt while supplies last. Both our specials this week are IRA eligible. If you'd like to learn more about a precious metals IRA, call us, and we'll be happy to help you in that process. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance. And with us today, a new guest, Jacob Imam from New Polity. He is an Oxford-trained economist with a doctorate in theology from the University of Oxford. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Delight to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you. And I think the direction of the show will be a little bit different than usual. Normally, we talk about like current events and what's happening in the economy. But a big focus of our show with Liberty and Finance is, precious metals. They're sound money. There's something real outside of the system. And I'd really like to get your perspective on the monetary system, maybe starting out, what is money? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And how can it be distorted by governments?
Well, it's a great question to start off with. I think that one thing that many of us overlook very quickly about money is that it is a technology. And like any technology, it changes the context of its use. You just think about, say, like the highway system, how much our lives have changed ever since the invention of the highways, that we're living further and further apart from one another, that neighborhoods don't look the same as they once did. You might say the same thing about our phones. We used to be able to look one another in the eye. We no longer are able to use kind of a funny example there. All technologies change the way that we interact with one another in our societies, and money as a technology is no different. And so to realize, first of all, like, how does money change the way that we interact with one another is a major question. Now, I would kind of give a very bland and usual definition of money, that it's a store of value, a measure of exchange, and a medium of exchange. But the ideas behind that are so interesting is that it means that we progressed in a way that we had some other mode by which to interact with one another in our economic lives before this technology was invented. So if you think about the common narratives about money, like we went from barter and then over to money, that's in a certain sense saying that we were acting as if we had money before the technology ever existed. And then I'm not trying to deny there were occasions of barter. I certainly think there were. But the idea that that there was a rare change or a minor change in the entire social order is a thing that I think we overlook. And so when you look at the Catholic tradition, which is where I kind of unapologetically and very happily sit and stand, is we have some serious hesitations about money in the tradition. I mean, Christ said things like, it's harder for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. Meanwhile, he's also saying that blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of God. We do crazy things in the Catholic tradition, like saying that some of us, we commend taking a voluntary vow of poverty. We call poverty an evangelical counsel, meaning that it is a way in which we set our lives to occasion good relationships with one another and with God. And we praise guys like St. Joseph for not just being a lover of the poor, but lover of poverty. So then you have to ask the question, what is it about money that starts to get in the way of having those good relationships with one another and with God? And in the tradition has quite a number of long answers to this, but the quickest way that I know to introduce it is to say that money takes the place for where friendship or love lacks. So you could think about, I need to either paint my walls, which is either I got to accumulate those skills of my own, or invite my friends over to paint with me, or I hire a company to do that. I can move my piano with the help of my friends, or I pay a moving company to do that. In either situation, I am not self-sufficient. I need the aid of others. But there is either a dependency upon people I know, utilizing a currency of fidelity, versus those that I don't know, utilizing the currency of money. Now, this doesn't mean that money's bad. In fact, the tradition keeps saying over and over, it's a pretty clever invention. But to know when to use it and when not to use it, to realize that money, even though it can pretty much purchase anything, shouldn't purchase everything, and realizing what are the occasions in which to enter into a transactional relationship or not is really the major focus of the tradition that I come from. And so I think that's maybe a different paradigm than others share, but I think there's something that we could all, no matter what tradition we come from, learn something from it.
Definitely. And I think it's important to understand, as you're saying, that money is an interesting tool that can be used for good or can be used for evil by individuals. Now, by governments, I know it can be distorted as well. And that's something we talk about on our channel a lot, about fiat currency having no backing at all, but then the original money, gold and silver, being something of intrinsic worth. Your perspective on that and how money can be distorted by governments?
Yeah, it's a great question. In part, when we're talking about money, we're talking about something that is a social invention, that no one person on their own can ever have raw money, because it is a medium of exchange. It's not used in and of itself. And so money really only exists where you have at least three people, so, where it's not just, if you only have two people trading with one another, is very simple. But you can get a medium of exchange when there's three or more gathered, as it were. That is a very important first realization, that money as a tool, as a form of technology, really has its own ontology from multiple people. And so if one actor, and we can call that a central actor, we can call that the federal government if you want, but if one actor is manipulating the currency, the value of it, without others noticing, then they are doing something rather clandestine in the perversion of a social tool. Everyone has one vision of what the tool is, what the technology is, how it works. Meanwhile, some subtle manipulations going on in the other direction mean that it's actually going to begin to change the social order without others knowing it. So traditionally, what you see with gold and silver is that there's no markings about it to say, hey, look at me, I'm money. utilize me as a medium of exchange or media of exchange. With the traditional argument for gold and silver depends upon them as being most stable, of having some sort of predictable and stable growth rate. It's slow. It's 1% a year or so. But it's predictable. It's stable. You know how the economy is going to grow based upon in relation with the growth of the body of money out there. It's also, of course, has this an entropy that's really quite remarkable. That they are gold and silver natural elements. You can't reduce them down to anything else other than what they are. It would take a magician or an alchemist to do that, and they've never cracked the code. The Federal Reserve was the first to do so. But what we're finding is that within the stability of the commodity itself, it can lend itself to being a stable measure of value. So I would say that once you start to move away from a form of money that is natural and that we receive into existence, that it's there whether we like it or not, we have cut out the ability for another party to manipulate it. Now, that, of course, gets very complicated once you introduce banks and government regulations. A lot of manipulation, of course, can happen there. But to be able to say that the very existence of money depends upon a different architect, a artificial creation of money that's totally out of the mind and creative invention of a particular actor, means that he or it is really the primary owner of that money, and therefore can manipulate it as he or it so chooses, without others having the same say about it. So I think those are some of the vulnerabilities that the metaphysical, you might say, vulnerabilities of the federal dollar. But that has a really interesting and kind of fun history towards it that might be a little bit more approachable than just kind of these philosophical ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think the history behind it is so interesting as well. I guess if we want to go, kind of how did we get to the place we are right now of in this system where money isn't at all backed by anything? As you mentioned, it's controlled by a central body rather than the free market that would choose gold and silver as some other real medium of exchange. How did we get here?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you know what? I think that there's such an important first base or first principle to realize, and that's this: that any society, any community is defined by its loves. That people join together in order to produce certain institutions, to procure certain goods, and that they are able to join together because they can procure those things better together than apart. And that singular shared desire is the thing that really binds them together. I'm not talking about a social contract, the social contract theory here. I'm trying to speak about a fundamental anthropological point, and that we are, as communities, defined by singular and shared loves. Now, out of those loves, we create certain things. So, St. Thomas Aquinas, he's the boy of the greatest of the Catholic intellectual tradition, probably, and he says that there are three modes of love, and I think this is crucial to understand if we really want to know how we got to where we did monetarily. His three forms are this. One is despair. It's when you have an object of love that you're never going to procure, that you're not going to get. So you despair. You're in the place of sorrow. You could be in the place of desire, and that's the second mode of love, where you haven't procured the object of your love, but you have a plan. Desire has a strategy. And then there's the third mode, and that is enjoyment. It's when you're actually in union with the thing that you love. Now, all communities, all societies are in this place of desire where they are trying to ward off despair, ward off sorrow by putting together a strategy for obtaining the thing that they love. And so I don't think that it's fair to make this strict dichotomy to say the free market would produce this one thing while the state would produce this other thing. We had to give the state its power. And how that happened is very subtle. It's very dynamic. It happened over a very long period of time, and we kind of backed ourselves into a corner. That's my argument. And this is, I think, the way that it happened. Now, when you look at America's founding, everybody agrees there was a lot of bartering going on. There was a trading in kind happening. There were precious metals that were bandied about, but a lot of them were unminted. When we actually had an official government in place, it was declared that states would use gold and silver as their coins. That was the rule of the Constitution itself. Now, that starts to change slowly over time with the introduction of the banking industry. Now, bank money is really a first movement away from what one might say is a natural or primitive economy in which we are utilizing things with this low entropy, high resistance to change, such as gold and silver as our money. And instead, we're starting to utilize fractional reserve methods so as to be able to enjoy our commerce through credit rather than through precious metals. Now, you can summarize this period of time in the early history of America in many different and dynamic ways, but Gordon Wood was probably the premier historian of this period, says that there's just no question about it. The thing that defines American culture at this time, more than anything else, is our love of commerce. Even the transition from in the Constitution of having the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are changed around in the Fourth Amendment to life, liberty, and private property. There is this movement into being commercial beings that is really defining the early American spirit. Now, of course, there's these fights between Jefferson and Hamilton that are raging between whether or not we have a central bank or not, whether or not we are into the monetary economy or more self-sufficient in an agrarian community that's going on. And after a number of decades, Jefferson just kind of throws in towels, says, "I give up. We've already chosen the direction that we're going to go." Of course, Andrew Jackson starts to change these things by dissolving the national bank. That only frees smaller banks to start popping up all over the place, and that's exactly what we saw. And in the free market, and this is an important point of the free market, is that because it's defined by competition, it's also defined by winners and losers. So that when you get to critical financial moments of our American history, such as the bank runs of 1893 and 1907, there's a major investigation that happens afterwards by the U.S. government. It's called the Pujo Report, the Pujo Committee that produces this kind of famous report, saying at the end that there is a critical mass of ownership that's held in very, very few hands. That J.P. Morgan, for instance, to give an example, had board members in so many different corporations that amounted to about $22.5 billion of the current stock exchange out of $26.5 billion. There really was a monopoly that was occurring. Now, how did that happen? Was that through government manipulation? No, it didn't occur through government manipulation. That came about through us as commercial beings choosing our own pattern and mode of living. Those came up through the natural processes of the free market. But what was the solution, quote unquote, the solution that came about so that we didn't come to another bank crisis, really a national bank crisis, as something that we don't feel in the same way because our government keeps bailing out these major corporations. We feel it, we certainly feel it, the crises that we're going through. I mean, prices keep going up. Middle-class families are putting off buying houses. People are putting off getting married later and later and later. So we feel it, but it wasn't this moment, this critical moment of terror that was felt. These things are just constantly escalating and mounting for us. Like there's, more straw being put on a camel's back over time. But back then, it was just like a bomb going off. And so there needed to be some sort of solution. And the solution that came about was not, hey, we need to change our desires. We need to create new loves. It was, how can we continually have growth in our economy, access to cheap credit in our economy, and to ensure that we are continuing to have this sort of progress going forward. It was an catch-22, according to the Pujo report, according to Woodrow Wilson, according to these big-name politicians at the time. Everybody saw the problem. They just said, we need to find a new instrument by which to procure the loves that we have, instead of saying we need new loves. So that, I think, is a really critical point to understand, is that sure, there's absolutely government manipulation at the beginning of all this. When the Federal Reserve was created on Jekyll Island, that was just a bunch of bankers getting together and forming new legislation. There's no doubt about that. And that's how the Federal Reserve really did come about. But they did so because they were looking at the trajectory, the vector of our country, and saying, America has already chosen. And this is the only way that we can go about continuing the economic expansion that we are currently enjoying and that people have set themselves upon. Does that make sense? I think that's such a critical thing to understand in these conversations.
It does. And it's difficult to hear that because it's so easy to fall into like the victim mentality, like, oh, the government's, terrible and we can't do anything about it. But you're coming from the point of, this is our fault, how we got here, right? And it's so important to take responsibility, but then also move forward. And you're mentioning how, we need to shift our loves, essentially. So how does the individual and the family do that in this situation where, we don't like where we are right now in the monetary system or the economy? How do we shift our loves to make small changes in our communities today?
Yeah, that's $1 million question. And I'll give you kind of 3 quick answers to that. The first is that we really have created certain structures that are just impossible to get out of today. And that's what Pope St. John Paul II called structures of sin, things that are in place that limit our freedom, that limit our ability to actually give the gift of ourselves to another, and that there are all these third parties that we are constantly having to go through in order to just keep up within our economic lives, so that we don't become just paupers in the way that we're living today. Try and have a bank account. Try and go on without a bank account, today. You can do it. There's no law that's forcing you to get a bank account, but just good luck surviving today without it. Same thing with the Social Security number. You don't have to have one, but try to live in our modern society without having one. You could be a homesteader still, and you're still going to be really, really stuck. So there's just certain things about our modern economy that we have to realize that over time, more and more institutions have been founded that have been concretized in our social order, that define our social order. And even though we chose them, our loves defined them 100 years ago, we don't easily get to opt out of them today. This is when, Karl Marx is one of the, great demons of the last of this last era. I would put it. His diagnoses are often correct, even if his suggestions are diabolical. And one thing that he says about our modern economy is that, or modern society, is as if a wizard cast a spell and now he cannot bring it back. That's really defines us pretty well, I think. So that's one thing that I would kind of first preface. Another is, well, what are you going to change your loves to? Is the next answer. What are the things that you really want to find? What do you want to get out of life? And that is a big question that we all have to face. And we constantly put it off by saying, well, let's just go for progress. Let's just go for expansion. But those are only means. Those are not ends. And to say that we're just going to continually grow our economy, or that prosperity is going to give more people access to more goods to decide to do whatever it is they want to do, is ultimately to fail to ever answer the most important question facing all of us. Is that, what are we here for? What are we doing with our lives? What does your life mean? You got to answer that question. There's no way out of that question. And if you say that, well, I'm not going to answer it, you have answered it. You've just answered it in a way that that is indirect, and that you're going, the very pattern and order of your life, the very behavior of your day to day is going to reveal to you and to others how you have answered that important and most essential question. So you got to answer that one. And then the third way I'd answer that is to say, you need to be, if you don't like the system, you want it out of it, you've defined your loves in a particular way. And let's be honest, most of us, what do we want out of life? We want great families. We want great friends. We want to be happy with others. And the only way that you're really going to be happy is with others. So if you're going to have kind of this friend-centric way of living that I think you can only have through the Catholic Church and through Jesus Christ, then you're going to have to start to make certain sacrifices about in your economic lives to actually transition over, so that you might choose friendship over money in more occasions than not. But that really is kind of the third step. You got to get the other ones right first.
Yeah, I mean, you have to start back at the beginning. What is your life for? And I think kind of maybe zooming ahead here, I know that you've talked about before, and we cover this on our channel all the time, about investing, right? And a lot of the traditional views of investing you actually disagree with. And if you look back at St. Thomas Aquinas, who you study quite extensively, you've mentioned how he has 3 rules of investing that a lot of people just completely ignore. So I think it would be really great for our viewers to hear that, of your perspective on what are some ways that you can invest that actually help build community, help build those friendships that you're talking about, and help, build a life based on the values that we really, truly want.
Right. Well, I would put it that I really agree with traditional views of investing. I would just disagree with some contemporary forms of investing is the way to put it. I would start with John Paul II again, who is just this a major figure that looms large in many of our minds, whether Catholic or not, who really was one of the major architects in the destruction of the Soviet Union and the communist blocs. And to say, what did this guy say about investing? And he put it very clearly and very succinctly when he defined it. To invest, he said, is to offer other people an opportunity to make good use of their labor. That is how he understands investing. And that's quite a game-changing definition for most of us. Whereas I always thought growing up that investing was a way of putting your money to work, of actually utilizing a return on your capital, which we now use simultaneously with, or interchangeably with, money in the capital together. for him, he said, you need to be able to think about money in terms of the others who are utilizing and what you're doing with it. And it's for the sake of labor. Labor is such an important and actually quite a controversial idea in history. For the ancients, like Cicero and Aristotle, they thought of labor as some sort of a curse that the gods set before man, that we actually had to work for our bread, and that was not some sort of mode of growing in dignity, but of humiliation, and that it was meant for the most vile of slaves. They said, that whole understanding got turned upside down when God became flesh, dwelt amongst us, and spent most of his years at a carpenter's bench. I mean, he really did come, Jesus Christ, in the form of a slave. This was like political dynamite going off in the ancient world. And it did change things around. That work was for the sake of man and not man for the sake of work. That work was a way that we ennobled our lives, that we transformed the very earth that we inhabit. And so to be able to offer somebody a way of working that does not reduce them down to just cogs in a machine, but actually creative people, is a task that the Catholic tradition really takes seriously. That they don't kind of miscolor and say, investing is kind of a dirty thing, but they actually elevate the importance of it and saying, we need to be careful about what type of world we are building. John Paul II also says that investing is always a moral and cultural decision. It's cultural because we are building a world through our investments. This landscape of our social order, the pattern and order of our lives, they change as a result of the ways in which we invest. And they're always moral considerations because we demonstrate to others what we want most out of our money. What type of cities are we building? That reveals to the world what we crave most. And so to be able to walk through these traditional forms of investing, that they are for the common good, that they are benevolently given to dignify the labor of others, that we are to be invested not just monetarily, but kind of spiritually into them. And I don't mean that in some religious prayerful sense, good as that may be, but that like you actually care that this thing actually works, not for the sake of your return, but because you want that new institution, that new company built that is going to actually change some things for the better, and that you are actually, invested in that way. These are just some of the major transformations that we see. And when we're looking back at the way that Christianity transformed Rome, and that I think it could transform our modern American economies as well. In kind of the end on that, to kind of end that kind of thought on investing, I would say that we are in control about what we're building, and that so many of us are just told, put our money in this account, put it in this fund, and we just do so blindly. I think we need to be contrarians. I think we need to actually think through what type of world we want to live in, get our loves ordered right, and to build, invest accordingly.
If we could maybe on a concrete note, because I know so many people listening and myself too have fallen into the idea of, we just, invest in something, it goes up, and then, we'll decide what to do with those funds later. We just, go for accumulation, right? And what you're saying is contrary to that, and more traditional, as you mentioned, is you actually need kind of a place in your mind. What am I going to do with this wealth? Right. And really building concrete things, providing for people, creating new jobs, creating real things. Could you kind of share with our viewers kind of concrete examples of that? I know that you have built businesses in your own life, so I don't know if you want to just share that with our viewers, but kind of concrete examples of things that kind of fit those criteria.
Yeah, absolutely. One general statement is that what's the goal again? For us, it is to have stable friends who are not having to be transient and leave for another job, but to get them situated here, to actually own the means of production. Ownership is just way too important. We're renting everything today. And I sometimes get a little bit hot because we find all these conservatives and, commending, this continual growth of the economy in which ownership is getting reduced to fewer and fewer hands, while more and more people are just renting more and more of their stuff. We get, it's a traditional American thing. Jefferson praised the yeoman farmer in the 20th century. We praise the small business owner. That's really the way in which we've been trying to invest. So some of the things that we've supported here locally is a farm to shelves grocery store. So a lot of people have heard about farm to table restaurants. Well, what about just getting that good produce where the names of your farmers to supply you with what you need? That's been a tremendous success so far in our small Rust Belt town, and really exciting, precisely because it not only provides a stable and good job for a good family in town, but it also just means that we all get to eat a lot better and for the same price as a normal grocery store. Sure, the selection's not what it is at Kroger's or Fred Meyer or whatever else, but the real things that we need to live and to survive are so much better. We're in the midst of building a brewery, which many people have done. Our model is based upon employee ownership, so that's one thing that a model that we've come up with and forms different vehicles of investing to ensure that that goal is met. We've started a workshop, which is kind of based upon the same model as a gym. So, for example, why do people get a gym membership? Well, either the equipment's too expensive or too big for their homes, and the same problems ail woodworkers. And so to, again, get productive property in the hands of more people, we created a pretty awesome workshop, if I can say so. We have various members coming in to have cheap access to the productive property, and it's again something very stable, making a lot of money, and but it's really provided a lot more people an ability to make money for themselves. People have just gone on and quit their jobs and are just working out of the workshop, for instance. So we're really kind of proud of those guys, and those are just some examples of what we've done here locally.
And I guess on the monetary side then, because I know there are a lot of new technologies, for example, Bitcoin, that's come out that people are saying this is kind of another sound money. I know the reason that myself, my father, and my brother became brokers, one of the main reasons is we want to get real money back into people's hands. Your perspective on that we've covered definitely the building the business, the economic side of things. On the monetary side of things, you mentioned how you can't not have a bank account, right? How much is there that's just necessary evil that we have to live with, and how much can we actually make changes in our own lives today?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I will answer it in terms of Bitcoin. I have a friend that's starting a new bank. I won't share too many of the details. He's very far into it, though, and it should be launching soon. But the idea is that he doesn't utilize any fractional reserve methodologies, that it is full reserve bank, that he gives out interest-free loans. None of the loans that he gives out are interest-bearing at all. There's just going to be some entrepreneurs that we need to create new institutions for us, and not all of us have that energy and vision, and so we'll just need to pray for those that do to help us out, like this guy. But in terms of, is Bitcoin an alternative to that? And I would say that I totally sympathize with the entire crypto movement because of this rampant manipulation of currency that we have undergone. I think if anybody's familiar with the Cantillon effect and the ways in which monetary distribution happens in an economy knows just how corrupt our current situation is. But how is Bitcoin for an alternative? And I would say it's that there's a mode of evaluating it that leads to a conclusion that I guess I'll share in a moment. But I think the first thing to say is that Bitcoin is very different from gold and silver, traditional forms of money, precisely because it's not a commodity. It's not something that you can have and hold, that you can utilize in other productive means. I mean, this conversation would not be had without gold. I mean, it's a great conductor. We have it in all of our computers. We have it in all of our phones. We utilize it in an industrial mode often. Bitcoin isn't a commodity. It is merely an abstraction that has no tether to the real economy. And so what is the way that we would traditionally then define that? And then again, in an economic sense, and the way that we would is saying that, well, that's part of the service sector. The service sector is defined upon rentable goods, the things that we can offer to one another that are, in a sense, intangible or temporary. And so whom are we? So then, I mean, maybe I shouldn't move on too quickly. That's a big deal. Those are our traditional economic and financial categories. And to realize that that is the proper category for Bitcoin begins to change the analysis of it tremendously. We have to ask the question, who then is offering the service? Who then is the primary owner of this money? And the answer then is not me. I am renting it. I rent it through transaction fees. I rent it through miners. That should at least first warn us that we are in a very similar situation then to federal dollars, where I am not the primary owner of my money, that there is somebody offering a service to enable me to have a medium of exchange. Now, there's other ways, and so that doesn't mean that it's insidious right off the bat, but it is important to make sure that we just get these categories set, that what I'm fundamentally doing is purchasing the labor of another. Now, of course, within how are they offering this service to me is another point of consideration. And of course, it's through ASICs. It's through these massive supercomputers and a tremendous amount of energy that's being expended. Now, a lot of people say, yeah, I've heard that point all the time. The energy expansion is a lot, but compare it to fiat, compare it to other services, it's reasonable. Compare it to gold, it's reasonable. But that misses the point. I'm not endorsing fiat currency. I think it's horrible. So it's not a good comparison to make. We want to make a comparison to something good, not to something bad. The second point I would say is that we really need to say, well, what is the expansion for? Sure, there's a lot of energy expended to mine gold every year, but gold is not has a use outside of itself. It's used in jewelry. It's used in industrial purposes. It has some sort of real, tangible industrial value to us. Bitcoin doesn't. What all the energy signifies is just to prop up the system itself. I think the example that we saw a few years ago with El Salvador was very telling. Whereas most business owners say that the number one thing that's holding back the Salvadorian economy is energy, that they are importing so much energy from outside. Well, meanwhile, they have a good bit of geothermal energy that in one unilateral decision, their president decided to use a sixth of it. It's 18% of it nearly for the sake of mining Bitcoin. That the energy that's utilized is only self-referential, that it is to buoy up the system itself rather than anything outside of it. It just seems like a bad economic decision to waste so much for the sake of an internally circular tautological system itself. At one point, I can't remember these calculations quite off the top of my head, but of course we have to think about the number of these computers that are just thrown in the trash every year. I mean, these computers have one function, so it's not like you can just utilize them once they're out of date for some other purpose. You just chuck it, in the bin, and you buy another one. And of course, technology is always getting faster and faster, and so you're consuming more and more. And there's something like 720 pounds of gold that are utilized in the current computers propping up the Bitcoin network today, which just seems like a joke. Like, you need the traditional form of money to get this new form of money up and running. And of course, a great response to all of this is to say, yeah, but gold is slow. Its growth rate is slow. That we need something that enables us to have a globalized economy that grows at a faster rate than what gold enables. And that is really where we kind of hit an impasse. We're just saying, well, actually, I think we just have different goals for what our economy has. Like, I want my economy to be able to support human needs. I have definite needs that I have in mind when I say that. I want our economy to support family. I want it to support my friends. I don't want it just to have this continual global growth, which I do think is, in the way that we're conducting it today, antithetical to those other values. We've placed that over the other values, and then we're just at an impasse. We have a different conversation to be had at that point.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned back earlier in the interview, it's so important to get your values straight and figure out, what is life all about? And then the other answers really flow from that. So Jacob, we really appreciate your time today. We'd love to have you back on sometime in the future. I feel like there's so much more to discuss, but if our viewers are interested right now to continue to look at your work, where can they find you?
Polity.com is probably the best way to find us. We're in the midst of building a new college, the College of St. Joseph the Worker. And so if you want some of these, another form of these ideas in action, collegeofstjoseph.com is another place that you can come and find us. Thanks so much for asking.
Of course. Any last thoughts before we let you go?
No, I'll just look forward to being back on you. Maybe we can hash out some things about speculation then.
That'd be fantastic. A bit more about investing. I think your traditional view is, again, it's so insightful because it's very different, like you mentioned, from the contemporary view. So we really appreciate that. And yeah, thank you so much, Jacob, for your time today. And God bless.
Great. God bless you. Thanks so much.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we can let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Kaiser, my brother Elijah, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.